All right, Mustangs, this is going to be the third and final example that I'm going to record for you for solving systems of equations using the elimination method. I'm actually going to take the same equation that we used in the second example, but I'm actually going to solve it that first way I was telling you about. Because when you are solving systems of equations and you do not have the same or opposite coefficient in a term, you are not always going to have an equation where one of your variables is going to have a coefficient of 1. And I feel like it's important that you see an example of what you can do when you have two coefficients that are not opposite and they're not equal and neither one is a 1. So what we are actually going to do here is we're going to try and get these y's to eliminate or cancel out or make a 0. So what I need to do is I'm going to need to multiply both of these equations by a constant. And once we do that, we need two constants that are going to cancel each other out. So they need to be opposites. So when I'm doing this, I'm seeing that I have a 2 here and a -3 here, and I'm trying to think of the smallest number that both of these numbers go into, or in other words, the least common multiple that both of these numbers, these coefficients go into. So the smallest number that I can think of that 2 and a 3 goes into would be a 6. So what we need to do is we need to multiply our top equation by a 3 so that we can get a 6 here. And then what we're going to do is we are going to multiply our bottom equation by a 2 so that we get a -6 down here. Because a +6 and a -6 will create a 0 pair. All right, so starting with the top equation. So if we multiply this whole top equation by 3, again, we have to use the distributive property. So we need to multiply everything by 3. So 3 times x gives us 3x's. 3 times 2y gives us 6 positive y's. And 3 times a -2, that gives us a -6. Now, we're going to go ahead and use the distribution property with the 2 in the second equation. And again, if this was a +3 down here, then what would happen is one of these equations I'd have to multiply by a negative. But this one's already negative, so that's really nice for us. So again, a 2 times a, let's start at the beginning. 2 times a +5 gives us 10x. 2 times a -3y gives us the -6y. Again, that's what we're going for. And then the 2 times a 29, what does that give us? 58? Okay. So now that we have these two new equations, if you look, there is where that 0 is going to be created. Because if you have 6y's and you take away 6y's, you're going to be left with a 0. So now we can go ahead and combine or add these equations together to get one equation with only one variable, which will be our x's. So 3x plus 10x gives us 13x's. Again, this is where we create a 0 pair because 6y's minus 6y's give us a 0. And then if we have a -6 and a 58, or basically 58 minus 6, we're left with 52. So now our last step is going to divide both sides by 13. And when we go ahead and do that, we get our coefficient of 1 on this side. And on this side, we get 4. Because 13 times 4 gives us 52. And again, now what we found our x value. So in our ordered pair, that's going to be our first part of our coordinate. And now we're going to plug this 4 into one of the 2 original equations, not one of the equations that we modified and we used the distributive property in, but one of the very original equations that we got. So it doesn't matter which one you use. Again, I feel like the top one looks like we've got smaller numbers here and positives to work with, so that's the one I'm going to pick. So I'm going to rewrite this equation, but again, this time we solved for x. So right here at the beginning, instead of writing an x, I'm actually going to write a 4 plus 2y equals -2. So now I just need to solve for y, so I need to create a 0 pair with this 4 by subtracting 4 from each side. Makes my 0, drop down my 2y, 2 negatives, 4 more negatives, gives me a total of 6 negatives. Last step, divide each side by 2, y equals -3. So again, this was the exact same problem as the one from before, and you'll notice 2 different ways of using the elimination method to get the same answer. X is 4 and y is -3. So I hope these videos were helpful. Hopefully you can watch them as many times as you need. And if you have any questions, please just ask a teacher.